Hello, everyone, and welcome to Modern Sales Pros event. I'm super excited to get started, but first, we'll let folks a couple minutes to trickle in, and I'd love to ask our panelists here today a fun little icebreaker question. Now that it's September here in North America and pumpkin spice everything is out in the market, I'd love to know what's your favorite thing about fall, whether it's football season or pumpkin season. I'd love to know. And we'll start off with Russ.
Oh, well, I've got my fall colors on, a little bit of orange, or I guess peach is the color. But for me, I think my favorite part of the fall is the changing of the leaves, which is on the East Coast. You get this short period of time where you've got these bright colors, good time to take a walk and get away from the tech for a couple of days. So it's always a fun part of fall.
Yeah, I love the seasons changing. Mike, what about you?
I think the biggest part for me is just cooler weather, right? I'm in Raleigh, North Carolina most of the time, and we're about to get a heat wave here apparently in like the triple digits. So I'm eagerly awaiting it to cool down a little bit and it to relax. So the cooler weather, leaves changing, of course. Excited for that.
Yes, I'm super excited for sweater weather and long pants. Matt, what about you?
I love fall. It's springtime without the bugs.
Agreed, agreed. It's currently moth season in Vancouver, and I'm just ready for it to be over. And Jonathan, what about you? Favorite
Yeah,
thing about fall?
well said, Matt. I think fall is my favorite season, so I could go on and on. But you said it, football. Football's big in my house, and my 4-year-old's finally catching on that it's something fun that we do as a family on Sundays. So I'm excited to cheer on my Minnesota Vikings this weekend.
I was going to ask, who's your team? Go Vikings. Amazing. Well, thanks for sharing. And let's dive into today's topic, sustaining a high performance sales culture. But before we begin, I'll say a few words about the team at Modern Sales Pros. For those of you who are not familiar, Modern Sales Pros is the world's largest and highest quality community for those in sales management, sales leadership, and sales revenue operations and enablement, aka our Modern Sales Pros. Our mission is to create an environment for our members to answer questions they struggle to solve on their own and help them to see around corners they may not know about. We do this through live sessions like the one you're at today. We also have an online robust forum, and we're also back with our quarterly summits. And we're starting to get back into in person events, which I'll talk about on the next slide. So if you're not already a part of MSP, you'll be invited to join right after this event. And speaking about our in-person events, if you're headed to Dreamforce next week, we'll be there on September 12th, right by the Moscone Center. So stop by and say hello. We are having a happy hour and we'd love to meet you in person. So I'll drop the link to register for free for our Dreamforce events here. So if you're in SF next week, we'd love to see you. And some housekeeping notes, this event is being recorded, so if you have a friend or colleague who couldn't make it, rest assured that this recording will be made available along with key takeaways and any blog posts or white papers or anything mentioned on this presentation will be made available at the previous event MSP page before the end of the day. And secondly, if you have a question for our panelists, please use the Q&A function at the top right-hand corner or leverage the chat and also let us know where you're calling in from. Next, I'm pleased to announce our sponsor for today's event, Captivate IQ. Captivate IQ is the agile commission solution that empowers companies to confidently adapt and deliver effective incentive compensation programs. You can learn more about Captivate IQ here. I'll drop the link in the chat. Be sure to check them out. They're doing awesome things. Now, enough about me and MSP. I'm going to pass it off to our panelists and our moderator today, Mike, to kick things off. Mike, take it away.
Yeah, thanks so much. Mike Iannuzzi, I'm the Senior Director of Business Development over at Captivate IQ. I'm really excited to chat with the team today and moderate the conversation. I'll pass it over to Russell to introduce himself.
Sure. Thanks, Mike. My name is Russell Zeck. I'm the head of revenue at Second Nature AI. Second Nature is a learning and training application specifically built for revenue team members in both sales and customer success to allow those team members to role play two-way conversations powered by AI. So personas that individuals can set, role play those situations, first presentation, negotiation, and then get insights onto how to improve, what areas they did well on. And we have a variety of different customers in insurance, financial services, as well as the tech industry.
We pass it over to Matt. Matt, if you want to introduce yourself.
Yeah, great. Hello, everybody. Matt Millen. I am the co-founder of Reggie.ai. Reggie is the leading AI co-pilot for modern sales teams. We streamline prospecting while improving engagement using AI. I'm super excited to be with you here today. I have been leading, building, and scaling high-performing sales teams since 1990, and excited for the conversation.
Thanks so much, Matt. Jonathan, you want to bring us home?
Absolutely. Jonathan Warren, I lead revenue operations here at Captivate IQ alongside Mike. So really looking forward to this conversation, even just some of the prep conversations with the guys I'm sharing the stage with. Got me really excited about the stuff that we're going to cover today. I think it'll be a meaningful chat for everybody here. So looking forward to it.
All right, gents, let's jump into it. I think this is a juicy topic, especially over the last 18 plus months. It's been really challenging to drive high performing sales teams. I think 2 years ago, and then over probably the past 8 years before that, it was a booming economy. And I think COVID really kind of changed things. And then obviously the last 2 years have been interesting to say the least. So I want to start off this conversation just talking a little bit about the core principles each of us have when building high performing sales orgs, and more importantly, kind of how you've rolled with those punches since COVID. And I want to pass it first to Matt to kick this off.
Oh, well, thanks for throwing it my way, and glad to jump in. A couple things I look for when building high performing teams. You don't want to hire someone looking for a job. And I like to find people that are associated to the mission of the product or service that I'm selling at the time. And more specifically, I love hiring reps that actually have been impacted by the problem we solve. So they have a visceral association to what it means to fix it. Now, fortunately, I've been selling sales productivity solutions for a better part of my career. So I also like reps that have demonstrated history of success with the buyer persona we sell to. So a few things here. Number one, if you find reps that move from, one industry to the next, they never really get like a solid foundation of the buyer persona, the day in the life, the challenges. So I look for consistency of the buyer persona. When I'm hiring that rep, I look for a visceral association to the problem. And like they really care about solving that problem. So it's more than a job. Because when it's only a job, a speed bump in the road, you go find another job. But when it's a mission, when you really care, like you're part of not only selling, but you're also part of helping that company grow and go through the different challenges associated with many of the startups. So I hire largely for culture, largely for mission, and good work experience.
Makes a lot of sense. I mean, Russell, do you want to piggyback on that and talk about some of the core principles that you look for?
Yeah, I certainly agree with what Matt said. And it's easier for us as an organization because our application mainly serves salespeople. So when they first experience it as part of the interview process, and we use it, they do a role play as part of the interview process, I look for the enthusiasm. Wow, I wish I had had this 5 years ago, 10 years ago. It would have helped me in so many of my preparation. So we look for that. And also I look for specific reactions now to what you could call the visceral truth, which is you could set expectations 2 years ago. Oh, we're growing, we're going to raise more money, and the market's looking great, and we close these deals. Today, you have to really be very straightforward. Look, this is a tough market to sell in. You're going to have to put in an extra 125%. It's possible at your other job, you had it a little bit easier. And I have one gold standard, which is the last thing I want is anyone starting at our organization to come in and say 3 weeks in, oh my God, this wasn't what I expected. So we really look to, during the interview process now, to vet that out. Do they get out the bad news? Obviously, see the enthusiasm to start, showcase the vision, and go from there.
I love that. And Jonathan, what are some of your core principles that you look for?
Yeah, these guys nailed a couple of them. Matt talked about the top talent, and top doesn't necessarily mean that they were X above, quota in their last role, but that it's also aligned with the type of, market, the buyer personas, et cetera. So top talent is obviously very core. And to Russell's point, like setting clear goals and expectations around what they're signing up for, and that there's a mutual understanding of what that expectation is. I think some other like table stakes for me is, you have to make sure that you're providing the necessary training and support for these teams, and that there's this culture of continuous improvement across your team. Now, to the how has that changed? I don't think any of those core principles go away given the post-COVID and kind of economic turbulence that we've been experiencing, but that has forced us to pivot towards remote work, for example, or leaning more into enhancing the way we digitally collaborate. Even the kind of the geographic displacement or the physical displacement of our teams has forced us to think more about emotionally supporting our team members and a lot more intentionality around culture. And so I think for all of that to kind of be supported and continue to foster that high performing team and culture, you need to make sure that you continue to find ways to have open lines of communication across your teams that involves leveraging the right technologies. And ultimately, you need to make sure that you're communicating and rallying around a shared long-term vision. So to Matt's point, you don't just have people there for a job, but like they're actually bought in and invested into what they're doing and what they're a part of.
Yeah, I think all of that makes a lot of sense to me. I think the biggest thing for me is transparency through the hiring process, right? I think if the folks that you're bringing on to your team really understand what's expected of you and understand how those things will evolve and change over time, and kind of testing their flexibility to kind of roll with punches and interview for that, I think that sets the landscape for you to kind of build a really, really nice kind of sales culture or just company culture. And hopefully it'll become a winning culture. But if it isn't, I think everybody really needs to understand what are those mission, visions, and values that you're standing behind and what you're trying to promote as a business. I think like KPIs are important, understanding how people are going to be measured. And stick to that, right? And also kind of talk about how things will change, because change is inevitable. The way that we were selling 6 months ago or a year ago is completely different than the way that we're selling now. And I was listening to a podcast this morning, and it kind of made me think about the last thing is just getting back to basics, right? Like really understanding. I mean, Matt, you said it really well around just like kind of value selling and understanding the problems. Xerox rolled this out in the 80s. So this is nothing new, but so many AEs and closers are thinking a lot about just pitching product, and you're pitching a product out of solution you don't really understand. And same things with BDRs. So really getting down to the basics of why does the company exist, being transparent around those things. I think that's super, super important. As we all kind of talk through this, did anybody want to add anything about some of those core principles before we kind of shift gears and talk about some different kind of topic? No?
I wouldn't mind asking you, in the getting down to the base principles, one of the things that many organizations have seen is a lot of tech in the sales tech stack. How do you align going back to the basics with what you're using from a tools perspective?
Man, it's funny you say that. I was talking to a guy this morning, and I was asking him, how is he thinking about solving a problem of connection, like connection rates? And I said, well, what are you thinking about doing? And immediately his response, it was really thought out. I could tell he was genuine about it, but his response was, well, we're going to try out these different pieces of software to bring us together to make calls at the same time. And while that's helpful, like for me, a lot of us, we already have tools in place that can give us a lot of insight. For example, if you're using a tool like Outreach, go to your reporting and look at heat mapping and see what hours of each day you have the best connection rates, and rally your team to call on those times. Think about what you're using that's already in place. And honestly, the work that I think you should be focusing on is the stuff that's hardest to do, that takes the most effort, but honestly, it's going to yield the greatest results. Like if you're looking for a silver bullet for your team to rally around, I don't believe in that. Any of these tools that we have, I think of them like a vessel, like a boat to get from point A to point B, but you still got to get in and row that boat, right?
Sure.
It's going to help you get there, but like you got to put in that work. And I think a lot of that comes from the basics, understanding your persona. I would urge everybody that's listening to this call, go back with your team through persona trainings just to do a quick refresher and ask them, what is the number one thing they care about? What is the number one challenge? And what is the reason that they would do something? Like, what is that kind of like touch the stove moment that would cause them to do something? That's the basics that I'm thinking of. And oftentimes it doesn't cost your business any money. So your executive suite will probably love that. But it's just putting in the work. And I think a lot of people, they want to find shortcuts and they want to try to solve problems with tech.
Hey, Mike, one thing I'll add too, as we close this topic up is, I look for what I call a history of winning. Winning over time and winning in like multiple jobs. And I think for anyone listening to this or participating today, considering a career change, like have you won where you're at before you're looking at what's next? And I view like every chunk on your resume or every job on your LinkedIn profile under experience is a chapter in a book. And like, does that chapter conclude the way you want? So as you're looking at your next role, how do those chapters tell a story that you're proud of? And I think it's really important that we don't always just look for the next shiny object, but we really focus on the job that we've committed to, the job we're in, and to make sure that we achieve everything that we set out to do. We achieve everything we promised to do during the interview. And then if it makes sense to move on, like you're really proud of your story. And that creates this history of winning and this legacy you create as a seller. And as a leader, the team you create legacy reps that either stay with you or move on. So I think it's really important, like we don't move too fast, like we complete what we set out to do and we've won before we move on.
I love that. It makes me reflect a lot too, I think, on my own experiences, but it's like, what's your brand, right? Like if you have a stamp that like, it's almost like the country of origin stamp, like after you leave an organization, like what do you put in your stamp on that you could say and point back to it and say like, look, if I did one thing over the last 2, 3, 4 years, this is it. I think that's pretty cool. Now, I'm sure we could probably talk shop on this stuff for forever, but I want to talk a little bit about change management and a little bit around like how you've had to rethink change management in the face of market uncertainty. And I want to start with Jonathan, since we concluded kind of our questions with him, and we'll flip it back the other way.
Yeah. So when I think about change management, I say and hear the quote, the only constant in life is change, quite frequently. And I don't think it could be any more true in our lines of work. I think what's critical for our organizations to really understand is that that's a mentality that we just need to embrace. Gartner has called there are moments of uncertainty. They've labeled it turns, and I became a fan of Formula One after watching Netflix's Drive to Survive series. And in racing, turns can be unpredictable. You've got poor visibility. There's dangerous weather conditions. It's a natural instinct to want to slow down when you're coming into these turns. But the drivers who speed up actually can come out and emerge victorious and ahead on that straightaway that follows the turn. And so I believe wholeheartedly that teams that can lean in right now in these turns, in these moments of uncertainty and unpredictable markets, are going to find themselves in front of the pack when things kind of come back down to earth and stabilize here.
Absolutely. Russell, what do you think about kind of change management and market uncertainty?
I think it's exceptionally hard, and I'm going to contradict myself here, which is the important thing about sales planning is to be able to sell your numbers up and sell your numbers down, right? Make sure that you set the expectations of the sales team members, see the ability to make those numbers, and then obviously that the board and the C-level execs are on board, are in line with that as well. But we're in a real crazy period. And one of the things that I've been really looking at hard is an annual plan is very difficult right now. And I'm talking from the early stage side. slide, because we're early stage, we're Series A. And it almost is akin to the term zero-based budgeting, which is this financial planning metric, financial planning approach that some very large organizations will use. We just plan on a quarterly basis, and we're going to figure out the next quarter after we look at this quarter. And there needs to be less of a 1 year plan now, more a 6 month, even a 3 month plan around your sales until you start to see some stability in a lot of different areas, both macro as well as at your organization level. So you need to sell the zero-based budgeting concept, saying there's going to be a lot of variation here. I'd like to do a replanning every 3 months.
That's a good, I mean, working in 3 month increments, I think is like the analogy of like eating the elephant, right? And honestly, you see companies plan and forecast for a back half of the year, and then 3 months into that back half plan, they're having to reforecast again because they didn't make it. So I've lived it. I'm sure you've lived it too, Russell. So that makes a lot of sense. Matt, what do you think about kind of change management in market conditions?
Yeah, in the old days, you used to rally the troops and roll out the new strategy, roll out the new direction. And it's not that way right now. It's actually not just market uncertainty. I think there's three forces we're up against today. Force number one is certainly the uncertainty of the market. Force number two, we have remote teams, so it's harder to get everybody in the same room and rally everyone up. And number three, I think, doesn't get talked about, but in many cases, you've got leaders driving change where they've never been through it before. Whether it's tech they're rolling out to the teams that they've never used, it's dealing with situations of how the teams have structured they've never been in. So oftentimes you've got leadership rolling out change they don't have experience from which to base it on. So like we're in uncharted water. So what I've done to help mitigate some of these forces is, number one, much more inclusion of the front line in the actual change management planning. And really starting off with the why. Like, why do we need change right now? What's different? Why do we need to do this? Get the buy-in. And then once you have the buy-in, actually help people closer to the front line come up with better ideas on how to drive that change and get it to stick. Because it doesn't matter what you push. It only happens on what actually happens. So I know all the planning meetings and the change meetings that we're running, in my company, we literally have frontline leadership, frontline workers providing input and guidance, and then we meet and monitor it weekly. So if we roll out a change, we'll actually, for a period of about 6 to 8 weeks, meet weekly on it and make sure that all the assumptions were right. Is the execution bearing fruit or not? What do we need to change in either the assumption or the execution? So those are some of the changes that we've made, just given the situation we're in today.
I couldn't agree more with like including frontline folks in the change management process, because I mean, if they understand why, they might disagree with it, but then they can at least stand behind it and say, okay, I don't like this, because people naturally don't like change that much, but they'll at least say, okay, I understand why Matt's making this change and I appreciate the transparency of him including me. I think the only thing I'd add is just like data. Right? Like, Matt, you made a call out of like a lot of people haven't led through these types of situations before. I remember in COVID, I called one of my mentors and I'm like, what do I do? Should I be mad? Should I do? And he's like, Mike, just be quiet, do exactly what they're asking you to do and work through it. And it was the best, one of the single pieces of advice I've ever gotten that I just was like, you got it, bud, anything you need. Right. And it made me rethink, but data, I think, is really important, and always rounding down on that data, right? Like just because you think your team might be able to close 2 million this quarter, right, keep that in your back pocket and say maybe 175, right? And I would rather them be pleasantly surprised and ecstatic that we went over what we expected. But the worst is having to get in that meeting again and level down. And then I think the one thing, because we're just leaders, we're thinking about process and execution. I think like the heart side of this is important too. And a lot of us want to skip that, not necessarily skip it, but like we're so focused on the outcomes that really understanding like what people are going through this. Just like you said, Matt, a lot of folks, this is their first time going through this. It can be tumultuous, right? The second time they go through it, they're going to have that wisdom and they're going to be more calm on the ball. But the first time you're like, what is going on? You feel like you're in a car crash that you can't stop. Yeah. Right. And I think really kind of leaning in and wrapping your arms around your people and saying, look, I've been through this, or bringing people that have been through a recession or economic soft landing, they can offer that guidance, and it kind of calms everybody in the room when you've been through those storms. Of course, if I go through a couple more of these, I'm not going to have much more hair, but I feel like I've got some hair to spare. So we'll kind of jump to the next kind of topic about how we define, validate, and refine what a high performer looks like, right? Because if you're thinking about teams hitting, I read a statistic not too long ago where like only 20% of AEs in the market in B2B are actually hitting at or above their number, right? So knowing that it's systemic across the industry in many cases, how are we bringing and resetting expectations, defining, validating, and refining what a high performer looks like? And we'll pass to Russell to kick this one off.
So again, talking from an early stage business and company, really a high performer, in my mind, putting the numbers aside, is about an individual who can take an incomplete playbook, let's call it chapters 1 and 2, as Matt said before, and finish chapters 3 and 4 with some smart ways in which to approach the problem. That's a high performer in an early stage company. And that includes being able to audible deals, or the process in closing the sale, either with smart, logical thinking, if you don't have the experience, or previous experience in having done it, even though they haven't done it at the company they're at. And that's really a sense of what a high performer is, that they go not fully outside their defined role, but they stretch out those boundaries in order to add value to everybody else, right? Really the concept of a team. And that's the way, really need to look at it, and listen to the hard questions. They ask hard questions internally. We were just talking about quarters. I had a rep joined us. He said, we're a Series A company. Why do we function by quarters? We're not a publicly traded business. Why are we just doing numbers monthly or 6 months? Why is it 3 months? And I said, actually, you have a good point. But it's that's what we see.
Are you advocating for bringing back monthly reoccurring revenue, MRR?
Hey.
Matt, what do you think about this?
Yeah.
Yeah, in this case, I have a very simplistic view. High performers consistently achieve their targets the right way, period. Good times, bad times. And when Russ referenced the 20%, those could be the high performers. Not everybody's a high performer. My experience tells me high performers will always perform high. They figure out how to win. When they join an organization, they look at what they're selling. They look at what they're selling to, who they're selling to. They understand the comp plan, and they very quickly put their game together, just period. And you'll just see that over time with this history of winning. Winners tend to win.
Jonathan, what do you think?
Yeah, I agree, but with a caveat to what you said, Matt, in terms of what winning looked like a few years ago might be different now. And Mike highlighted the difference in quota achievement. So when I think about defining what high performance looks like for the bulk of my career, that would be, it's twofold, right? There's a quantitative and a qualitative part. On the quantitative side, it could just be a kind of a math exercise of what do the historical numbers say? What is that benchmark of what good looks like? If historically we've always modeled, somewhere between, let's say 70 and 80% of total street quota attainment, then we could expect that a high performer is one that, meets or achieves that number. But now if the new bar is 25%, 40%, whatever that is, your high performer might be below that old benchmark. And so I think the key part on the quantitative side right now is less about defining what historical benchmarks say and more refining to that more kind of have a recency bias there in terms of the timeline that you're looking at. So Russ mentioned it in terms of thinking about financial planning, but same goes for your modeling and expectations for those quantitative measures. okay, well, what is the team shown to do for our fully productive sellers? What does the last 3 months look like? Last 3 quarters look like? And is it even fair to compare year over year at this point? And, obviously, most organizations probably aren't tweaking quotas mid-year, but you certainly are going to have different expectations when 20% of your team is hitting their number versus 80%.
And I mean, they're relative. Go on.
Sorry, just to not leave out the qualitative measurements of high performance. I think that it's very important that as a team, you're also clear on what are the expectations that we have of you as a seller. Most of our sellers have something, I mean, I'm speaking generally for the market, like a 50-50 base and variable comp. And so it's like, what is expected of you to earn your base? Like, what are the core things that you need to do well to perform in your job? And the more clear we can get on those things, as well as, whatever handful of kind of more intangibles that you want to highlight and focus on as a team, is equally important right now.
Matt, were you going to add something?
Yeah, I was. Those were great points, Jonathan. I would say that there's relative performance, which is how you perform relative to your peer group. There's absolute performance, which is how you perform against what you were asked to do, regardless of how tough it is and what it's versus a year ago. I would also say, and this is in my history and experience, high performers tend to identify as high performers. Like when you meet a true winner, they identify as the top rep. They you can look at their accolades and their LinkedIn profile, President's Club, 110%. I mean, you can just see like the profile of a winner and how they identify around that success. And one of two things will happen. I talked about this mission orientation. They hit this conflict. If they end up in an organization where they feel very associated to the team and to the mission, but they don't see a path to winning for whatever reason, they have this inherent conflict of their identity and, whether or not they have to go win somewhere else, or whether or not you can reestablish what winning is in this short period of time so they can continue to identify with who they are. So I think, it's interesting. And at this time right now where you have fewer reps actually winning, I think there's a big identity crisis going on, because you have, reps that won under great times when people were buying a lot that are struggling. So were they really winning, or were they being carried along? You've got great reps that aren't doing as well, but they're still winning. So I think you've got like a big identity crisis going on in selling right now, because as the tide is harder to swim against, you're starting to see no less effort. Everyone's still swimming as hard as they can, but there's different amounts of shoulder strength in terms of the ability to actually move forward.
Mm-hmm. We could probably spend the rest of this time unpacking that one point that you made. I'm wondering how Matt, like how you're dealing with that, right? Like what percentage of your team, and like you could give a hypothetical number if you don't want to share too much, but like what percentage of your team do you feel like are like the identified high performers that are just absolutely crushing it, even though the market is kind of crazy? Like, and then for those that were crushing it historically that aren't anymore, like, what are you doing about that? Like, are you trying to double down and round out some rough areas that maybe that weren't fully developed to scale in a market that's tough? Can you talk a little bit to that?
Yeah, I think so. It's a really good question. We have a large part of our team that's ramping right now. So of my team that's here, like, create winning, right? Like right now, the fully ramped reps are doing well. But I'll say, like, during Q1, like, we had to evaluate as a company, what did winning look like when the bank was failing? What did it look like when people that we sell to, we were seeing lots of layoffs and budget freezes for a while. So we had to, recalibrate what winning looked like in Q1. Like it didn't look like Q4 for us. So it was a combination of recalibrating around what was available and still expecting our team to do what they needed to do. So like we were human beings through the process, and we're coming out of that now. We see ourselves coming out. So I think you, Mike, talked about the human side of this. This is where the human side comes out
Totally.
And making sure that, the goal ambition is equally calibrated to the market at the point in time. So we went through where we didn't continue our hiring. We were scaling going into the year. We stopped scaling. We were going to bring more team members on. We made a decision to feed the team members that we had on board more, given the lower conversion as an example. So we made some very conscious decisions as an organization on how to preserve the identity and the morale of the existing team, during the uncertainty, and then start to rescale coming out of it.
Yeah, I think that's one important piece, because there's a lot of sales leaders on this call that are hearing like top performers are going to be top performers. And I agree, right? It's kind of like the 80-20 type rule, like 20% of your team is going to be crushing it. And then you have the Bs and the C players that you try to up level with competencies and enablement. But I think what's important is to like understand that companies, after the first 6 to 12 months of this kind of craziness, the standard that you kind of were trying to hold everyone to had to come down a little bit. Because, I mean, imagine the company's not hitting, none of your people are hitting. You have a very, very contentious culture that's like almost becoming toxic. And if you keep saying like, why aren't you hitting? Why aren't you crushing it? You're a top performer. What's going on? We have to also like kind of understand what is possible within our territories, right? Within our segments, the business units. Who else is getting involved? I mean, CFOs started popping up in every single conversation, no matter if you were selling HR software or commission software or anything. Like they became part of the buying process, and many people didn't know how to sell to that. So you have to enable and train. But it's complex, and I think when hiring a top performer, I think it goes back to the initial point of kind of our core principles. You got to be flexible, you got to be transparent, and you got to be, I think one thing none of us said was coachable, right? Like you as a leader have to be coachable and have to pivot and change. But the people that you hire, like if they come in with a bias or multiple biases on how to sell, they're not going to do well from what I've seen. So I'm interested in some actionable steps for how you kind of evaluate performance. And it kind of goes to, I think, a little bit of a question that we saw in the chat about, is anyone tracking competencies in addition to principles to find that top talent? But I think we can also answer this in the vein thinking about how we evaluate performance and identify areas of improvement. Jonathan, we'll kick this to you first.
Yeah, so I started to touch on this a bit in my last point, but I think it's very important that you can measure both the quantitative and qualitative. So the quantitative stuff takes care of itself, right? You need to figure out what that appropriate bar looks like, but then are they putting in the right work on these leading indicators? Are they making the phone calls? Are they setting the meetings? Are they converting to the next stage, et cetera? Ultimately, are they hitting their number? I think on the qualitative side, it's very important, again, to be explicit with the team what's expected and really vision cast what good and excellence looks like for your org. So one of the things that we've recently introduced here is this performance rubric for our sellers that is a monthly exercise between them and the frontline manager of saying, okay, how are you doing on a scale of needs improvement, average, and great in these different categories. So for us, we're measuring things like, how are they doing from a sales execution standpoint? Their deal management. How are they working our sales process? How effective are they at doing proper discovery? How good are they at building relationships? We're also looking and measuring other things like just general attitude. Are they a team player? Are they jumping in and providing thoughtful help, kind of unprompted, to people's questions in Slack, et cetera? What is their overall knowledge of our product, our market, the buyers, et cetera? All of those aren't going to show up in the stat sheet, but it's equally important for us to keep a good handle on how everybody's doing in those areas. And then again, being very clear and transparent back to the rep where they stand. And to Mike's point, if they're coachable, they'll work with their manager, with enablement, with HR, whatever it is, to up level, and you can then foster that culture of high performance.
Matt, what do you think about this?
I think Jonathan made some good points. I think we're very quick to talk about evaluation, and we're very slow to talk about enablement. And I think what happens is many leaders evaluate beyond what they've enabled. So we start with like, what do we train our folks to do right? And I'll give you 3 areas, and then we measure against that, because we don't want to evaluate beyond like what we've coached them or trained them to do, because that wouldn't be fair to the process. So the 3 areas I look for, I call it SAM: story, activity, and mindset. So story, like everything that comes out of your mouth, everything that comes out of your computer, like talking about, like, can you tell the story? If you're an SDR, can you do the script? Can you handle the basic objections? If you're an AE, can you do the demo disco? Like, because everything's like scripted out in a great way where we create like moments and experiences. Like, so can you do that? Then we look at actions and activities. Like, are you doing the work? Period. And we've got dashboards for the work, AE prospecting, manual email, like everything like that needs to be done. And then lastly is like the mindset, the attitude, which Jonathan touched on, which is super important, because there's nothing worse than culture erosion. In fact, there's 3 reasons you can go on a performance improvement plan. It's will, skill, or drill, but culture, like a corrosive culture, like there's no room on the team for it. So I think enabling teams on the front end, and then we monitor everything from the leading indicators to the lagging indicators. I meet daily with my sales leaders, SDR and AE, and then weekly we're reviewing with leadership on how we're doing against our indicators, and then how our lagging indicators are coming along. So I think it's like just having like a whole program in place where team members feel supported, like they understand what they're going to be measured on, but they also get like trained and aligned and ready for that.
Yeah, I tell my team a lot, like, hey, if you trust this process and you follow it to a T and it doesn't work, that's on me 100%.
Right.
But if you veer from this process and you do your own thing, you're on your own, right?
Yeah,
like I'll take the bullet all day long for my team if they're running my play and it doesn't work. But more often than not, you see them kind of off in the desert on their own without any water, and you're like, man, I can't help you. So, Russell, what do you think about this? What are your points?
I think Jonathan and Matt really covered a lot of the parts of the areas where you can do the quantifiable measurement. The tools, there's tools out there, coaching tools. There's obviously a variety of different ways in which you can assess people. But I also like, just to add to what Matt had said around mindset, which is to really look at doing a discovery with your rep, right? And then look at them and say, are they looking at 2 aspects? Is there a sense of accountability, and is there a sense of responsibility, right? Because there's some stuff that it's up to the company to improve, and then there's some stuff that's up for the individual to improve. And you have to really look at a thing is, don't tell them, right? But the manager should be doing a discovery call to see if they can identify those issues themselves, and that can really help with a mindset and driving that sense of accountability. And then hopefully you get some ongoing improvement. And if you don't, then you've got to deal with that issue. And we use a variety of frameworks, but one is a GROW framework, right? Which is really a discovery process to look at the problems and the challenges around areas that need improvement.
100%. I want to make space for a juicy topic that will kind of bring us to almost to the end of this chat, but I want to talk remote versus in person, and more importantly, how have the last few years impacted organization design and culture as rethink what it means to be distributed as a team. So I'm interested first, remote, hybrid, in person, your opinions, and then talk about kind of org design and keeping people engaged through this kind of displaced era that we've been in. And Matt, why don't you lead this off?
Sure. I think like COVID induced remote work as a reaction. Like nobody planned a couple of years ago to push everybody into their homes to go work. So what happened was we had this overnight reaction, and like the call to duty was, let's just get people back to work as quickly as possible. We've never been through this before, and we had to get back to business quickly. So we figured out the right software and the right working environments, and people working out of kitchen tables and bedrooms. And because we haven't been through this before, we didn't think about any of the implications beyond just getting people up and running. Like we didn't think about like when COVID was over, what happens. So during this time, people are like, hey, if I'm working out of my home, I'm going to go down to Cabo. I'm going to work out of Costa Rica. I'm going to move to Boise instead of living in the city and doing the commute. And like we kind of like, we all moved away. So it's not like we all lived away during COVID. It's like we all took advantage of COVID, not maliciously, but we all took advantage of the situation and ended up working out of great places. And then COVID's over. And like, now what? And like, well, I don't live there anymore. And you didn't, at the time, it was okay that I did this. So I think like there wasn't any planning or preparation for post-COVID. And we find ourselves in this situation now where like, well, what do we want to do about it? And it's not like that easy, like, you know, just unlocking the front door and everyone come back in the office, because expectations are different, geographic positioning is different. So we've been wrestling with this. So we grew up during COVID, so we were never all together. But what we have done this year is we got very nice office space here just outside of Seattle. Every new hire in customer success, SDR, AE, works in the office, period. Like we only hire people that will work in the office. For people that are remote, that are on the team, like they can forever be in the city that we hired them in, because like that was the deal. But like going forward, we're going to centralize our team. And the benefit of this, and you know, it's controversial. Like I'm sure there's certain jobs you can be super productive, but like there's nothing better than the deep learning experience of joining an organization and sitting around people, hearing the conversations, asking questions, getting answers, meeting people, going to lunch with Russ, as opposed to like a Zoom coffee. Like it's just different. And I think culturally, you just have to decide like what you want your company to be. Like so we are hybrid to the extent that we grew up in COVID, and we've got great people that don't live near one of our offices. But we've also made a deliberate decision that going forward, we will hire into the offices.
Love that. Jonathan, what do you think about this?
Yeah, talk about a hot button issue. I'm sure that we've got a very wide mix of opinions in our on our call today. Agree with a lot of what Matt said. I think that there's no one size fits all answer for this one, and it can be very company and stage dependent. I think COVID and all of that, it offered a lot of pros and a lot of cons. Pros, you know, I joined a company that had been pre-COVID entirely in office. There were 20 people. Throughout the pandemic, grew to 300 some, and the flexibility that leaning into that pivot there of being able to hire people wherever, the top talent wherever they happen to sit around the world, really unlocked a lot of growth for the company. I think on the con side of things, we all have had to learn and take a new approach to how we build our teams, how we communicate and work together. As Matt said, there's a tangible difference between the conversation that happens over a Zoom room versus the added water cooler talk, the fly by the cube, the lunches, the happy hours, that really is very hard to replicate. And so I think from a culture standpoint, many of us, I certainly took for granted that culture was just something that kind of happened organically when we were all in an office together. And now in our kind of disconnected world, if you're not intentional about it, you won't have a culture, and a lack of culture is a bad culture. And so we see, you know, our team and our leadership team is thinking quite a bit about what can we be doing intentionally to foster a healthy and strong sales culture and org-wide cultures. And interestingly, a lot of it revolves around like, how can we get our teams back together? It might not be a return to office, but how can we get our teams or the entire organization together for an offsite? How can we do an SKO in person? You know, Mike, I'm excited to hear your thoughts on specifically for the business development teams, but there's nothing like that boiler room mentality. And I think the energy and the learnings of being in place and feeding off one another is very hard to replicate.
I agree. Russell, what do you think about kind of remote, in-person?
it's a difficult subject because, like what Matt said, right? There's some people who joined, they're remote. You're not going to all of a sudden change that. Our dynamic as a company is also fairly unique because we have 30 odd people in one office in Tel Aviv, and then our US team is completely remote. So you also have that dynamic where you've got one group of people who will communicate differently because all of the people that they usually talk to are in the office. So they may be less thorough in their written communication because they can go walk to the person, not realizing that, hey, this revenue team is all in the US, all dispersed. The one thing we are moving towards is I was lucky enough that we hired in three states. So we'll be clustering all our new hires in one of those three locations moving forward. So while it's not a perfect of getting everyone back together, at least everyone is in the same area so that they have a little bit of a sense of community on it. But when I started the hiring again through COVID, like Jonathan said, I just will get the best talent no matter where they are. But now I'm become very much attuned to being together is exponential from the standpoint of what you get out of it.
For sure. I think honestly, there's pros and cons of everything, right? Like when you're hiring a remote team, you open yourself up to global talent and you can get the best talent. So, Matt, global talent might mean you get those top performers that identify only as top performers, and every single person hits at or above 100%. You might have more of that if you open it up globally. I don't know. Just throwing it out there. But no, I think hiring around hubs is a good move. I think definitely having folks that can get together, meet for coffee, be in the office a couple days a week. I think that's ideal. Most of the folks that I work with are I would say between 22 and 30 years old, right? And I'm working with some folks that have gone through college. Maybe they're getting into sales development. It's their first job, and their college career was through COVID, right? And 3 of the 4 years that they were in college, they literally were in a dorm room or working from home on a computer, right? So imagine the challenges and the changes of not only acclimating to either a corporate environment or a sales environment, but also a new company, also new tools and products and tech stacks, but then also just being able to communicate with people like us that have been in the industry for a long time, right? I think there's a lot of unique challenges. And when you come together, you can break that down and you can adapt faster. If you're constantly living in one of these boxes that we're currently in right now, I feel like the ramp time for socialization takes longer, right? And the emotional intelligence that you can gain from looking over at your colleague a couple desks away and rolling your eyes, you can't do that on Zoom, right? And you can't learn how to read a room or read a call as quickly, right? So I think there are definitely pros and cons, but I do believe personally building teams together definitely will help ramp people faster and also retain talent. If there's a correlation between people having a best friend at work and their tenure at the actual business, and when you don't have that connection, I think that's important. So as you guys also, I would encourage people as they're interviewing, when you're about to make somebody an offer, think about who would be their best friend at the office, right? Or who would be their best friend in the business. I don't mean literally, but who would they latch on to? And I think that'll tell you a lot if they're going to be there a year, 2 years or greater, right? So I know we have time probably for one more question. I want to talk a little bit, and we mentioned it, Jonathan, you alluded to like a 50-50 split. But I mean, being from CIQ, it would be bad for me not to talk about compensation. So I want to think about how you guys create the right incentive compensation strategy to help sustainably motivate reps and drive over performance, right? Specifically, I want to double tap into this and say, like, how do you incentivize top reps when promotion timelines have been drawn out because people aren't necessarily hitting, and it doesn't make sense to promote somebody when people aren't winning? So I know a loaded question, but what's the right compensation strategy in your opinion? How do you incentivize performance, and how do you keep people engaged? We'll go to Matt first.
I'll go quick here as we're wrapping up. 3 things you can do right now outside of your comp plan that I've done. Number 1, you can prioritize your best leads to your best reps. Like, that's highly valued by your best reps. They get the highest quality leads first. So you feed the eagles. Number two, you can put in place a mentorship program where your top reps help take on like your new reps, and you might give them a little extra equity for that. So there's ways that you can compensate them outside the plan. They also start developing some leadership skills for if they have bigger aspirations. And then third, again, I think it's perceived as high value. Have your high performers sit on a comp committee. Help them have influence on how the comp plan design is done, or some of the incentives, contests, or programs, and they feel like they've got a plan here. So I think outside of the comp plan, which I'm sure others will talk about, putting them on the comp committee, giving them a mentorship program, or the better leads are great ways to keep high performers feeling highly valued.
I love that. Jonathan, what do you think about this?
I think I want to be a top performer on Matt's team. I get the best leads. I get to set my own comp plan. That sounds like a good deal. No, it's great advice. Obviously, from a incentive compensation plan design standpoint, it has to be realistic but still achievable, and reward the sellers that go above and beyond. More recently, we've seen as less as that bar has maybe been lowered in terms of where the overall team attainment numbers have been. We've seen spiffs be a really effective way to drive the right behaviors, and specifically, in the sense of kind of leaning into that turn and being more adaptive. You can get more real time with some spiff programs, and so whether for us that's been kind of galvanizing the team around a competitive rip and replace, or Mike, I saw you recently give the BDR team a half day off on Friday because they just crushed a number, in the earlier part of the week. Stuff like that, I've seen really go far. I think, and Matt alluded to this too, but those non-monetary rewards are just as crucial. So yes, maybe promotion timelines are drawn out, or there's less clear like promotion path, but what you still can do to reward those top performers is give them those professional development opportunities. You can give them recognition, and not just hey, I saw you do that, good job, in a private Slack message, but broadcast it to, the entire team in your all hands, or give them an opportunity to speak to, this is what I did and how I won here, what I found successful, giving them that platform to really share and be celebrated. And beyond, compensation committees, I think just more broadly speaking, giving your top performers and your teams leadership roles and visibility into whatever special projects, going back to getting your front lines involved in some of the change management and process decisions. I think the more invested the team can feel, and the more involved they are in some of those decisions, I think is a really crucial way that you can kind of tie in the whole compensation strategy.
Russ, what do you think?
I'll just add with one extra point, which is creating some aligned team member incentives, having the AE and the SDR as a team work together, getting comped on extra pipeline that they could be building, right? Pay someone out. Hey, get us into this new market. Even if you do a small deal, I'll pay an extra amount just because we want to figure out if there's an opportunity here. You get a sense of, are they interested in a leadership role, right? By doing that. So those are some of the ways that I see you could really incentivize people without that future promotion available in the near term.
All of the above. One thing I'll say is if you think about goals, like we talk about, okay, your goal is X, is the team, how are we pacing to goal? One thing we do is we roll out OTEs or their variables, and we talk about it when we make the offer, and then we never talk about it again. And I think there's so many organizations that I've gone into where people just have they're like, yeah, my variable might be $60,000, but I don't know if I'm going to hit it, right? I think solutions, obviously like CIQ, give you that ability to be able to see man, if I close this deal, I'm going to make $5,000. And a lot of them do the math, but you would be surprised. I would encourage you guys to ask your sales reps, hey, if you close this deal, or if you hit, 80%, do you know how much you're actually going to take home? And they're going to say, I don't really know. Maybe your base is too high if they're not even thinking about it. But if they don't know how much they're going to make, that right there is an indicator, right? Because if I log in and I look, man, if my team hits over 100%, this is how much I'm going to make. That incentivizes me to drive the performance that the business wants to see. And if the reps are winning, the business is winning, and vice versa. I think that's important. The only other thing I would add is like, it's really hard not to just like spiff out for like base expectations, right? And this is where I'm pretty old school, where it's like, look, congratulations, you did what was expected of you, right? I'm not going to incentivize you to make X amount of calls or do whatever. But if you're doing exceptional or you're going above the agreed upon expectations in the JD that you agreed to, I'm all about spiffing all day long. But they hit 100% of their number. I don't believe in paying over for that. And I think if you want to create a true culture of fulfilling commitments and driving outcomes, I think that's super important to incentivize for the right things, incentivize and spiff exceptional behavior or teamwork, collaboration, stuff that isn't normal. And if you do that, you're going to see the rest of the team rise up and meet those expectations. The ones that are just there to collect a check, I think they'll fizzle out and they won't hit. But it's really important to incentivize those people that are going above and beyond, and not just spiff for everything. Because I see some people, they just, man, we don't understand why we're not booking enough meetings. Let's just spiff. Anybody that books a meeting gets $100. And it's like, no, it's got to be something special, right? It can't just be basic expectations. I know we got a few minutes left. Any other points that we want to make? I know we've talked about a lot of stuff today, but I want to turn it back to the crew. If you guys have any final points you want to make on driving high performing teams, I'd love to kick it back to you guys.
I think on my end, I've said it's been a great conversation, and a lot of takeaways for myself included.
Likewise.
Yep. Same here. I'd maybe just wrap up by saying, for me, my biggest takeaway here is that clarity is crucial for everyone in the org, but for your sellers. So sales teams that understand what's expected of them to achieve your benchmark of success, and that they're clear on how they'll get to that level of performance, they're going to spend more time creating and closing business. And that's what we're all after here.
100%. Angelica, if you want to bring us home, that'd be great.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you so much, Mike, for moderating. Matt, Russell, Jonathan, thank you so much for your insights and wisdoms. I know everyone here got awesome takeaways from this amazing conversation. Thanks for everyone for sticking with us. I know we went a little bit over, but just a quick reminder that the whole recording, along with the key takeaways and any links and mention, will be made available on the MSP website before the end of the day. So look out for that, and we will see you at the next MSP event. Thanks, everyone, and have a great day.
Thanks all.